Modern novel, as we say, modern novel is novel of experimentation. It's a novel of new forms. It's a novel with experiments with techniques, with narrative, narration. But I think the most important aspect of modern novel is a genre or subgenre of novel that is called stream of consciousness novel. The term stream of consciousness is widely used. The concern of writer is to examine for a moment an ordinary mind on an ordinary day. That was seen in Virginia Woolf when one day of Clarissa Dalloway or Mrs. Dalloway is captured when she goes to buy a flower for her party, and the day she holds the party, she meets Captain Septimus Smith and she shares his misery, that is death like life, because of isolation and failure to have a hope in life. Into the lighthouse, we can say there are three parts and two parts, last and first one, the window and the lighthouse. They also capture a specific moment, an ordinary mind on an ordinary day. That's Mrs. Ramsey in the first one, and in the last one, that's Lily Briscoe. Virginia Woolf put her idea in her essay, which title is Modern Fiction. But stream of consciousness techniques are employed differently by different writers. A major modernist writer who shares Virginia Woolf's concern to render the inner life of characters is James Joyce. James Joyce, who is thought the best novelist of century. At the end of 20th century, he was declared the best with his masterpiece Ulysses, which was thought the best novel of 20th century. And Ulysses provides an interesting comparison of Mrs. Dalloway. Protagonist of this novel is Leopold Bloom. That novel shows the fragmentation of narration is often represented by unusual cohesion or changes in the normal ways of thinking, linking sentences, paragraphs, and narration. This leads to unusual jumps, juxtapositions, and connections which are marked by unusual or missing punctuation. In stream of consciousness novels like Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, and American novelist William Faulkner, we often see that texts are not punctuated much, and that show the jumbled up or juxtaposed structure of their thinking. I am not describing detail of Ulysses because it's not mostly included in syllabus. It's a complex novel, though it is the best one, but it is not uh, included in syllabus. Mostly another novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, is included in university syllabus. So stream of consciousness is in a freer, looser style that captures something of Molly's excited reverie. Molly is heroine of this novel. The lack of punctuation reflects the way in which thoughts and ideas merge into one another, because stream of consciousness novel don't follow chronological order. They don't have a sense of first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or beginning, middle, end. It claims that past cannot be separated from present. James Joyce's contribution to the development of novel in English in 20th century goes beyond particular techniques of formal experimentation. His contribution was a major one on several levels. There is the detail of the author's life, and that is significant because his semi-autobiographical novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, is often included in syllabus, and protagonist Stephen shares many aspects with writer James Joyce. James Joyce was born in Dublin, the capital city of Ireland. He was educated in Ireland and spent most of his adult life in Europe, mainly in France, Italy, and Switzerland. Reason was that James Joyce had a theory of art, and that theory of art is called writer in exile. It means the writer should show distance from immediate pressures upon his writing, which can be political pressures, religious pressures, cultural pressures, and to liberate oneself from these pressures. He thinks writer should go in exile, both literally and metaphorically. Literal exile means writer should live in a world that is away from his immediate environment where he was brought up, home he has a strong association, and to show a distance from that everyday pressures are um, socio-cultural, political, religious pressures, he should go in exile. Second is that to develop an opinion that is not influenced by temporal and spatial factors, the writer needs a distance from his religion, from his culture, from his political association, because all these things are already in his veins. They can be the cause of distortion of his writing. He cannot make an objective statement about his people, about his religion, about his country, if he does not go in exile. Modernism that has a focus on more, you can say, intellectual movement and objective movement uh, that emphasized that type of experimentation. So James Joyce, who always creates masterpieces, his collected poems are, there is one volume of his poetry and that is thought his masterpiece. He wrote one play which title is Exiles, that is also thought is best. He wrote only one collection of short stories which title is Dubliners, that is thought is best, and he wrote 3 or 4 novels. First novel was A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Second was Ulysses, which was declared the best novel of century, and the third was Finnegan's Wake, which is a masterpiece of the author, but uh, this novel is actually somehow difficult one, so it couldn't get the same appreciation as Ulysses got. The first unpublished draft of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is called Stephen Hero. That unpublished draft was published after writer's death, and in this way his novels become 4. In all his novels, plays, poetry setting is Ireland. He does not go beyond Ireland, but he does not want to live in Ireland. So try to understand the idea of writer in exile. Writer in exile does not mean the writer does not write about his people. He writes about his people, Irish people. He writes about Ireland. He writes about Irish Catholic Christianity. But his idea is that he should be objective. And for that purpose, he should go in exile. In his semi-autobiographical novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, the writer has five different stages of development, and each of his stage improves his understanding of life and art, and he uh, uh, moves to the upward stage. In the last stage, he decides to go in exile. In Europe, James Joyce was at the center of literary critics, but he remained throughout his life of voluntary exile from Ireland a deeply Irish writer. एक तरफ उसने आयरलैंड से डिस्टेंस शो किया और दूसरी तरफ डीपली आयरिश राइटर जिसने अपने किसी भी टेक्स्ट में लिटरेरी टेक्स्ट में जो सेटिंग्स हैं वो आयरलैंड से बाहर नहीं की एंड ही रोट ओनली एंड ऑलवेज अबाउट डुबलिन. Dublin is a city of Ireland. To write about Dublin and its people were for Joyce to write about all human experience. You can say that's an idea that human being is a microcosm or one city is microcosm of for all cities. So if someone is the best regionalist, someone is best local writer, his regionality, his localism will actually prove his universality. His first short stories, published in the collection Dubliners, depict the lives of ordinary people of the city with clarity and realism. The stories are carefully organized so that meanings arise not only from the individual sketches, but also from the relations between them. So James Joyce's stories, they convey the meanings, and meanings arise not from the individual sketches, but from the relations of the characters. Best known story from this collection of Dubliners is The Dead. I think this story is included in MA English short stories paper. The Dead is the final and sequence to which many of the previous stories point. So we can say the final story is the climax, that's the last one, and its title is The Dead. In the story The Dead, a husband is shocked out of his self-satisfaction and egotism by learning of his wife's love for a young man she had known many years before. There is a quote from the story, and I skipped that quote. Theme of many stories of Dubliners is the attempts of many of the citizens to free themselves from lives in which they feel paralyzed. Character feel paralyzed by relationship, by social, cultural, and religious tradition, or by their own natures. So it can be depiction of state of modern man. Joyce's treatment shows a mastery of the short story, and it becomes increasingly detached and neutral. I would like to mention another story of James Joyce, that's Araby. And in that story, we see there is an unnamed protagonist who runs after the shadows. He has unexpressed feelings, unexpressed love, that's early teenage or adolescent love for his playmate or for his street-mate Morgan's sister. She has, uh, because both the girl and the boy, they are in adolescent, they are in early teens, they have no, uh, they have not actually experienced the emotions which are a refined one. That's a raw and spontaneous emotions. And he imagines her, he sees her, imagines her during his studies, during his plays. He is eager to have a glimpse when they played at night in the street. Mean, uh, he has created those fantasies which the other person is unaware. While going to school, he often used to follow her. One day, when he follows her, and at one point she asks him, has he visited Arabi Bazaar? He says no, but he makes up his mind to visit that bazaar. And idea is that because the girl whom he loves, she will be perfect, and whatever she likes, whatever she mentions, that will be the best. Though neither the girl nor the boy has any idea that Arabi is a point of industrial exhibition. He insists to go there. He eagerly waits for there, and after much reluctance and refusal of his uncle, finally he succeeds to go there. But when he reaches there, it's darkness. It's evening, and stalls are going to be closed. Soon there is darkness, and he gazes into his own soul. Last lines of this poem that shows the agony and anguish of the character, that shows the conflict of objective, rational, logical world versus subjective, emotional, irrational world. And at the defeat of his emotions, he feels anguish and pain. Arabi is not a story of a boy and a girl. In fact, that's a story of a modern man. So an incident that has been taken from the lives of an Irish or two Irish family, or you can say one Irish street, that helps to depict the state of man in 20th century. How man has left behind the religion. That can be seen from the depiction of the story when um, narrator or protagonist tells about his home, where was once a priest lived, but there is no priest now. There is no Bible that is relevant at this time. So the world where religion is not commanding or religion is not offering solution, the world where the boy is living without parents, it means familial love is absent. This world where someone feels for someone but cannot relate with others. I mean, lover and beloved, they cannot express and they cannot relate each other. And growing pressure of objective world, which is seen in the last scene of the story. Running after the shadow, that is an image which can be used for modern man. James Joyce first major novel, A Portrait of the Artist, a Young Man, is semi-autobiographical, tells the story of Stephen Dedalus. Stephen Dedalus, uh, who actually recalls the story from the earliest days of his life, showing him growing into adulthood and independence under the powerful influences of Irish national, political, and religious feelings. We see that Stephen Dedalus has a poetic soul, but he cannot recognize that he has poetic soul from his childhood experience when their housemaid or governess Dante, she scolds him on some जो है mistakenly conceived wrongdoings that eagle will come and take out his eyes. He makes a poem out of it. So he has natural instinct towards literature, poetry. He was by birth a poet, but it took a time to understand him that he is meant for creation of literature and how to create literature. He experiences epiphanies. Epiphany is the sudden realization that proves a new insight for life. It not only changes the future, but also changes one's perspective about past. Epiphany is a significant technique of modernism, including modern fiction, and James Joyce probably is the best writer who uses that technique. So epiphany is there. The novels which deal about the growth of protagonist. These novels are called Bildungsroman novel. So in this way, James Joyce novel, a portrait of the artist as a young man, proves partially a Bildungsroman novel. Ideal, ideal of resisting influences, free oneself from influences, and to become an exile from Ireland and to dedicate his life to writing. He reaches this decision in his final epiphany described in 5th chapter when he realizes that his surname, Daedalus, has an allusion. That is a Greek allusion of creative genius. Daedalus, it is thought that who invented labyrinth, it is thought it was Daedalus who made wings for his son Icarus, who wanted to fly in air. So Daedalus was a man of imagination. He was a creative genius, and Stephen shares surname with that Greek character, Greek mythical character. And when he realizes it, he decides that he should liberate him from immediate influences of Ireland. In first epiphany, he discovers his potential as a leader of his school, who is not shy, who is not introvert. And in second epiphany, he realizes his potential of self-examination. That self-examination is the result of a fear that he can be exposed. And he feels duality at that time, duality of matter and spirit, duality of a Virgin Mary and prostitute, duality of mind and body, or spirit and body. In third epiphany, he listens to a hell sermon, and that hell sermon touches his heart, and he uh, decides to leave life of debauchery, which is started at second phase of his life. He chooses piety. He opts religious, ascetic religious practices. It seems that he is going to be priest, but that was not his intention. His intention was just to make up for his spiritual loss. In last, in second last epiphany, he sees a wedding beauty, a girl, and he feels a sensuous beauty, and his heart actually uh, leads him to imaginative, creative appreciation of that beauty. When he realizes that he has a potential to appreciate sensuous beauty, he decides to be an artist. When he decides to be an artist, he thinks that he should go to university and learn the nitty gritty of arts. He joins university. He has a lot of debates with his university fellows, with his roommates, with his university teachers, and he ponders over the nature of aesthetics, two types of art, stasis and kinesthetic. Kinesthetic art causes a desire for action. Stasis does not create a desire for action. He prefers stasis art. He also realizes that artist moves from three phases of his development: lyrical, narrative, and dramatic. Lyrical is emotional first stage. Narrative is the second stage where he can not only express himself but also express about others or on behalf of others. In dramatic phase, the artist makes a fusion of personal and others' experience. He becomes impersonal in art and he presents others' experience as they are his own. So Stephen develops a view of the writer as necessarily alienated from the values of society and committed only to artistic values. We can say the theory of art for art's sake, which James Joyce owns. T.S. Eliot in poetry, Stephen believed that the true artist had to be objective and not simply give direct expression to his feelings. If he gives direct expression to his feeling, Wordsworth concept of poetry, then he will be at lowest stage, lyrical stage. He compared the artist to the God of creation who remains within or behind or beyond or above his handwork. Invisible, refined, out of existence, indifferent, paring his fingernails. There is an entry from a portrait of the artist as a young man. I read that entry. That's these are the notes which actually Stephen decides to make when he is in next stage. April 26. Mother is putting my new second-hand clothes in order. She prays now. She says that I may learn in my own life and away from home and friends what the heart is and what it feels. Amen. So be it. Welcome, O life. I got I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and forge in the symmetry of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race. Old father, old artificer, stand me now and ever in good stead. So that's his style. We can say like D.H. Lawrence and Virginia Woolf, that is poetic. Writer least uses, probably not used quotation marks to quote the argument. So fusion of present and past is retained through this technique. James Joyce's novel Ulysses is the high point of modernism, and it was published in 1922, the same year when T.S. Eliot The Wasteland was published. James Joyce novel have multiple contribution. One is use of creative myth or myth method. Certain myths have been used in a portrait of the artist as young men. Ulysses or Odyssey myth has been used in Ulysses. So, myth method or creative myth method has been employed by the novelist. He has used Homer's model in Odyssey, in Finnegan's Wake. James Joyce's idea of writing is that one piece of writing should ironically respond to the previous one. यानी आर्टिस्ट अपनी जिंदगी में कहीं स्टैग्नेंट नहीं होना चाहिए. हमारे यहाँ तो ये दावा कहते हैं उसने ये लिखा उसने ये लिखा, जैसे वो सारी जिंदगी अपने एक ही लिखे हुए की कॉपी करता रहो. और हमारे आर्टिस्ट ऐसा करते भी हैं. इस वजह से उनके पहले और आखिरी नॉवल में या पहले ड्रामे और आखिरी ड्रामा में फर्क नजर नहीं आ रहा होता. James Joyce believes that it should respond ironically. So James Joyce, whatever theories of art and artists presented as a portrait of the artist as young man, these theories were ridiculed in his novel Ulysses. And what was presented in Ulysses, that was ridiculed and ironically responded in Finnegan's Wake. We know he was master of European languages. I think more than 50 languages he knew, and he was expert of these European languages. He was a lover of our Norwegian dramatist Henrik Ibsen, and just to read Henrik Ibsen in Norwegian language, he learned Norwegian language. He had many operations of his eyesight, and he was almost blind when he died. Reason was his voracious reading. The way he responds to language, the way he makes the new coinages, he becomes a novelist of elite. Elite here mean literary elite. And his novels, they are read with, you can say, footnotes or endnotes that actually clarify his real worth. James Joyce, sometimes it is claimed that he is overrated novelist. And it is mostly criticized by those who don't like the form of stream of consciousness. But in English society, English literature, we can see James Joyce, who is impressed by French novelist Marcel Proust, the icon of stream of consciousness novels. James Joyce impresses Samuel Beckett and Harold Pinter. And we can imagine what is Samuel Beckett. In a way, half of modern literature is Samuel Beckett. So, great novelist, great dramatist, Samuel Beckett, he idealizes James Joyce. Harold Pinter, great poet, dramatist, short story writer, and his drama has multiple connotation, including theater of the absurd. He also idealizes James Joyce. In his cyclical view of history, Joyce, like W.B. Yeats, was influenced by 18th century Italian philosopher Giambattista Vico, who proposed a 4 stages circular process of human time. These are two school of thoughts in history. One believes that history repeats itself and the other says it never happens. Joyce saw his own generation as in the final stage, awaiting the anarchy and collapse that would eventually return them to the first stage. I mean, चार stages हैं तो fourth stage दोबारा फिर first stage पे वापस आएगी. Joyce builds his cyclical view into the structures of his novel. That's why we can say he wrote 4 novels. The final word of Ulysses is yes, which reverses the letters S and Y of the first word, stately and signifies a triumphant new beginning. The end of Finnegan's Wake is a half complete sentence.